29th of January, 1992. A team of elite detectives is preparing for a top-secret operation. A 25-year-old woman called Stephanie Slater has been kidnapped. Police are waiting for her captor to make contact.
Hello,
Everyone?
speaking.
You got the money?
Yes, I have.
Right. You go to Glossop Station.
Glossop.
Glossop Station,
Okay.
west of Manchester.
One of Britain's biggest ever surveillance operations is underway. It was one of the most remarkable cases in UK criminal history.
The kidnapper was Britain's most wanted man.
At its heart, a victim in mortal danger.
Every minute she must have feared for her life.
We thought that she'd be found dead somewhere.
And a ruthless abductor demanding a fortune.
Have you got the money?
Who's this, please?
Never mind. Have you got the money?
Who insisted on total secrecy.
If you say anything, this could result in Stephanie Slater being murdered.
It was a serious threat,
The body was found over there
because this was a man who had killed before.
with 2 blows to the back of the head.
He was a very evil and cruel man.
He's a psychopath. He's a cold, calculated killer.
A man who was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse.
There was every chance that the kidnapper was special forces.
The money was missing, but there was no sign of anybody.
How could one man evade 1,000 police officers?
The letters were just, frankly, gobsmacking, talking about a game.
No matter what the police do, he's always going to win.
We were convinced we were going to find another body.
Why should he keep her alive when she was the only person breathing that could help us to put him away for the rest of his life?
Have you got the money? Have you got it?
(1991) had been an eventful year. British troops went to war in Kuwait. The IRA launched a mortar attack on Downing Street. And media mogul Robert Maxwell drowned in mysterious circumstances. But as 1992 began, in Birmingham, the biggest crime story of the decade was about to unfold.
I was with the Deputy Chief Constable when news was given to me to report to Nechel's Green incident room in the centre of Birmingham following a serious incident. That was the first time I was actually briefed that a girl had been kidnapped. I was informed that she was an estate agent in the Great Bar area of Birmingham and that she'd left to go and meet a client.
The victim was 25-year-old Stephanie Slater, an employee of Shipways Estate Agency. And police didn't have to wait long to find out what her kidnapper wanted.
We had police officers at the central sorting office in the city centre of Birmingham. They managed to intercept a letter addressed to Shipways from the kidnapper.
The package included a tape recording.
This is Stephanie Slater, the time is 11:45. I can assure you I'm okay and unharmed. Providing these instructions are carried out, I will be released on Friday the 31st of January. The money must not be marked in any way whatsoever.
Initially, the first time I heard that, I recall feeling relief that Stephanie was still alive.
I can assure you I'm okay and unharmed.
The ransom letter suggested the kidnapper was playing games.
Your employee has been kidnapped. and will be released for a ransom of £175,000. With a little luck, he should be still okay and unharmed. The first impression I got was that he had referred to his victim as a he, where in fact she was a she. It was deliberately to show us that he wasn't afraid or wouldn't have been afraid of having kidnapped a man.
The message ended with a chilling comment.
You have been warned. His life is in your hands.
The kidnapper demanded no police involvement. It was vital that news of Stephanie's abduction didn't leak out. Detectives struck a deal with journalists and then briefed them.
About 12:10 today, a telephone call was received by Shipways from a man stating that he had kidnapped Stephanie and was holding her for ransom.
A decision was taken by Phil Thomas, our Assistant Chief Constable, to open up to both the local and national media.
He's clearly planned it carefully. Some of the methods now being employed show some degree of intellect.
The press would not leak any of the information given to them on the condition that if we got the girl back alive, they would be allowed to interview, film and photograph her.
And he's got me worried. He's a real professional.
We were all really disarmed when it came out. It was Phil saying, you know, if you say anything or this gets out, this could result in Stephanie Slater being murdered.
Police held a series of press conferences over the following week and speculated about the kidnapper and his motives.
One, he's a psychopath and would kill her in any case. Two, he's after the money. And three, he's just playing a game.
You could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. It was exciting, dare I say it, as a journalist, because you knew that you were witnessing something that we'd never seen before. This was a young woman who'd been taken while she was doing her job. Because we didn't know what had happened to her, I think among ourselves that we just didn't think that it would have a good outcome.
A 25-year-old estate agent from Birmingham called Stephanie Slater had been kidnapped. Her abductor was demanding a ransom of £175,000 from Shipways, her employers, and had insisted that police weren't involved, an instruction Shipways ignored. John Plimmer was head of the West Midlands Intelligence Unit, but even he had never dealt with a kidnapping before.
This was actually where Stephanie was sent to by Shipways to meet this man called Mr. Southwall, who had asked for an appointment to look around this particular address. There was also a witness, a lady I remember who used to live opposite, and told us that she'd seen this man, who was evidently this Mr. Southwall, walking up and down the front of the premises here, obviously waiting for Stephanie to arrive. Because of the fact that obviously we didn't know whether the culprit had been local or even just outside the area, we had to treat everything we did with the utmost caution, remaining totally covert. We kept away from the house because for all we knew, the kidnapper could have been watching us. I needed a team of forensic experts to go in there. We got them to wear white overalls as though they were decorators, and we put a ladder or two in amongst them. So they just went in looking busy. We were doing the best we could, trying to stay covert.
And the forensic team made a disturbing discovery.
Blood was found there. Of course, it was worrying, because we didn't know what kind of injury she sustained. But I mean, that is the worst thing you want to find at any scene of a crime, is human blood.
The kidnapper had clearly been a meticulous planner.
Although it's a semi-detached, it's virtually in isolation from the rest of the area. You've got this alleyway coming down here, and you've also got an entrance and exit further along. We found that the back kitchen door was also ajar. It was very possible she could have come through that way, being forced by the kidnapper, to a vehicle that might have been parked up anywhere here. And once he got her inside the car, he got the two escape routes to go down. So, yes, it was an ideal house for what he intended doing.
Preparations immediately started for the ransom drop, which was expected in 7 days' time. It would be a mission for a team of elite detectives pulled from across the Midlands, Number 4 Regional Crime Squad.
Everyone that was on the crime squad was an experienced detective, trained in surveillance techniques, kidnap, extortion, blackmail demands. We would be tasked with dealing with the upper echelons of criminality at that time, drug trafficking, armed robbery, criminals that couldn't be dealt with by conventional policing methods. It was the pinnacle job to have.
The ransom run would be the best chance for the police to catch the kidnapper. But there were risks attached.
The greatest danger was the fact that the perpetrator had already made threats to kill Stephanie if the police were involved or if they spotted the police. It was imperative that everything was totally covert in order to maintain Stephanie's life.
As the crime squad practiced for the ransom run, the investigation turned to the victim. Stephanie lived with her parents. Could her home provide any clue to her abduction?
To actually knock on someone's door and say, I'm a detective, can I come in please? And then give them the news that we believe that Stephanie had been kidnapped. And then also, oh, by the way, can I stay at your house until she's returned? I think that anyone would find that a little bit disconcerting.
Stephanie was an only child and had been adopted by her parents, Warren and Betty.
I obviously used sympathy tactics to try and calm them and to say that we were extremely good at this type of incident and that I was a negotiator and trained in this type of thing, and there were hundreds of other officers who were being called in to help with the investigation.
Stephanie liked the unusual. I mean, obviously, before she settled down to become an estate agent, she was a goth. So she still enjoyed all of that music. She liked interesting things and spirituality, and she was always looking for just something that'd be interesting and it was a bit different. Stephanie had such a, I'm going to say she was nosy. She loved looking around houses. Yeah, she loved being an estate agent. So I was aware throughout the embargo of what was going on because I worked at the police station. It's just completely shocking. You hear about things like this on the news, in books and films. You just can't get your head around it. And obviously you're hungry for information. You're trying to find out little bits that you can from the police officers that are around. And you'd pick up on something and think, oh God, you know, so there was blood in there and hair. So yeah, we thought that she'd be found dead somewhere.
I set up a cell, negotiating cell as we call it. I had a wall with yellow stickers with everything that I could predict that the kidnapper might ask the family if he rang, or indeed any relatives or friends, what they were to say.
The notes meant the Slaters wouldn't let slip that Stephanie was missing. It was also important if the kidnapper called, he wasn't alerted of the police presence.
The Sunday following the kidnapping, the first call came in on that line from the kidnapper. And I remember Ellie monitored it. It was Mr. Slater who listened to the call.
Hello? It's Stephanie here. They've asked me to make a message to you.
We had a tape message from Stephanie to show that she was still alive. My heart was racing throughout.
Just to let you know, I'm all right. Unharmed. I saw West Bromwich Albion lost yesterday to Swansea. 3-2.
She actually was obviously made to repeat the football score of a match that took place the day before between Mr. Slater's home team and another team.
I think for the Slater family it was a real comfort, and it was also great encouragement for the inquiry because everybody knew then that we still had a live victim.
I want you to know that I love you and not to worry too much, and that whatever the outcome, I'll always love you. Look after the cat for me.
The day before the drop-off, the kidnapper made another phone call. This one was to Kevin Watts, Stephanie's boss. It was Kevin who the kidnapper had instructed to drop off the money. And if he alerted the police, Stephanie would be killed.
Come speak to Kevin Watts, quickly, please.
Who's calling?
Don't mind.
Hold on.
Hello?
Kevin Watts?
Speaking.
You got the money?
Hello?
Have you got the money?
Who's this, please?
Never mind. Have you got the money? For tomorrow?
For tomorrow.
Yeah. Have you got it?
I'm getting it, yeah.
3 o'clock.
The one thing that came out of that short call was that this wasn't a disguised voice, it was a natural voice. We had, on record, his actual voice.
You got the money?
Hello?
Have you got the money?
Who's this, please?
Never mind. Have you got the money?
He was being cocky now. I think he was also anxious. When we listened carefully to his voice, it was up and down, which showed to us that there was a lot of anxiety there. Now, that was important because an anxious man is becoming a dangerous man as far as his victim is concerned.
On the 29th of January, a week after Stephanie's abduction, the kidnapper calls as promised.
Hello, Kevin Watts?
Speaking.
You got the money?
Yes, I have.
Right. You go to Glossop Station.
Glossop?
Glossop Station.
Okay.
West of Manchester.
What the kidnapper doesn't know is that an elite force made up of some of Britain's leading detectives is following the drop-off.
Subject vehicles off.
Determined to put him behind bars. They're heading north, following the courier to Glossop Railway Station, near Manchester.
Confirming altitude now as the eyeball. No deviation, speed 60.
It's 2 hours away. This is a dangerous mission, and the risks are intensified because the courier, Kevin Watts, is a total novice.
The decision to use Kevin Watts as a courier was taken by the Regional Crime Squad. Personally, I had some misgivings about that. I didn't think it was right that the man should be subjected to such danger.
Kevin Watts felt duty-bound that he should be the courier, regardless of the pressures, that it would place on him.
I know the regional crime squad took him away for a day and trained him in the use of covert radio operations.
Still northbound towards Manchester. Past the services sign 8 miles.
He'd got a two-way radio system whereby he was able to speak to us and conversely we could speak to him.
The crime squad officers are also using tracking devices, one fastened into the bag containing the money and the other on the courier's car.
There was a police officer trained to run alongside him if he had to pull out. The danger with that was, had the perpetrator made contact with the courier en route and started asking pertinent questions that only Kevin would know, then it jeopardises Stephanie's life. It was a live kidnapping, and the consequences of it going wrong would have been difficult to live with if you had been the person that had not performed on the day and that had resulted in a fatality.
What he actually did on the night of the ransom drop was certainly the most bravest and courageous thing I ever knew an individual to do as a non-police officer.
Stephanie's life now depends on a rookie courier and a ruthless kidnapper. "7 p.m. on the 29th of January 1992. The ransom run aimed at bringing kidnapped victim Stephanie Slater home is on schedule.
Confirming Alpha 2 now as the eyeball. No deviation, speed 30.
Detectives are tracking the rookie courier, Stephanie's boss, Kevin Watts. He's carrying £175,000, and the kidnapper has insisted on no police involvement.
You go to Glossop Station.
Could you spell that, please?
GLOSSOP, west of Manchester. There's a telephone box inside the entrance hall, only one.
The courier's first job is to take a call at Glossop railway station.
I arranged for a live intercept to go onto that phone so that I could listen in live to the call to Kevin Watts. And he directed him to go to another telephone kiosk close by to the railway station.
The kidnapper has left Watts a note in the phone box. The next waypoint is 18 miles away across remote Pennine moors. There's a message waiting in a place called Oxspring.
He was briefed to wait 5 minutes when he returned to his car so that it gave the surveillance team time to get ahead of him so that everyone wasn't chasing him.
Weather conditions are coming in, but we maintain the red route. The red route towards the next centre, Oxspring.
The Pennines in winter can be a forbidding place. And as Kevin Watts left Glossop, the weather worsened. It began to put the entire operation at risk.
Weather's really closing in now, team. Close up, close up.
As the crime squad headed into the hills, another team of detectives from West Yorkshire were hanging on the courier's every move. In July 1991, 6 months before Stephanie's kidnap, an 18-year-old Leeds woman called Julie Dart had gone missing. Police believed the same man was responsible.
Julie Dart was a young woman. She lived with her mother, Lynn, and her brother in a rented property on a quite large estate in Leeds. She had a boyfriend, stayed sometimes with a boyfriend, sometimes with her mum.
Well, if you ask anyone who knew Julie Dart, they'll say she was lovely. A bright, vivacious, attractive girl. Not the most academically talented at school, but a hard worker. Had a tough job that she did every night after school to earn a few quid. She was also a talented runner. She represented Bingley Harriers, and she was good enough to run middle distance for West Yorkshire. So there was lots going for Julie.
A letter sent to Julie's boyfriend, Dominic, alerted the family that something was wrong.
Hello, Dominic. Help me, please. I've been kidnapped and I'm being held as a personal security until next Monday night. Please go and tell my mum straight away. Love you so much, Dominic.
We had a situation whereby neither a mum nor a boyfriend knew she was missing because they each thought that she was staying with the other.
Mum, phone the police straight away and help me. I've not eaten anything, but I've been offered food.
It wasn't until we received the letter that they suddenly realised she hadn't been staying with either of them and she'd been missing for some time.
Feeling a bit sick, but I'm drinking 2 cups of tea a day. Mum, Dominic, help me.
In the letter, she was trying to tell her boyfriend and mum that she'd been kidnapped, that she was in danger. And I've got to say that part of that letter haunted me for some time because I realised that when she was writing this letter, she was in desperate mortal danger.
Around about the same time, another letter was sent to Leeds City Police. It said a young prostitute had been kidnapped from Chapeltown. And they went on in the letter to demand £140,000 and stated how it would be delivered by a policewoman at Birmingham New Street Station. The one thing that really hit was both had the same postmark. Huntingdon, 7 p.m, the 11th of July, 1991. Now that can't be coincidence.
Detectives found witnesses who'd seen Julie in the red light area of Leeds.
She fell into debt, just a few £100s. She was accused of stealing some money. Julie always denied stealing that money, but had agreed to pay it back. She was persuaded to go and work as a sex worker. Anyone who's got a teenage daughter will think about that.
What made Julie's kidnap extraordinary was that the police were the target.
The question was, who in the right mind would think that the police would pay the money? That's sort of strange. But at this moment, we've got the letters, we've got instructions on what we have to do.
The ransom run starting in a call box at Birmingham New Street went ahead, but the operation was a failure.
It appeared he was probably playing a tape-recorded message down the phone to disguise his voice. She didn't pick up the information which would have sent her to the next point. Our best chance to catch the person is picking up that ransom money. But we never got off the starting box. I was personally gutted.
Three days later, in a field in Lincolnshire, confirmation the kidnapper was deadly serious. There, 80 miles from Leeds, a dreadful discovery was made.
The body was found over there. It was in a bundle, in a pink and white candy-striped bedsheet, and tied up with rope. The body wasn't well hidden because it's in a farmer's field, and at some time, someday, the farmer would find it. I think the main thing that the killer wanted was to remove the body from somewhere which would implicate him if it was found, such as at his premises, in his garden, or something like that. It's quite a remote area, just off the B6403, the High Dyke Road. There is a disused railway line, but this is not an area where cars would come. Might get the occasional person walking the dog, but beyond that, the only person who's really going to come up here is the farmer.
The body was found here this morning by a farmer and his son in a field outside the village of Easton near Grantham. It's not known how long it's been there.
It was quite apparent when the body was examined that it was, from the waist up, quite badly decomposed. Identification, visually, was not an option.
It was dental records that revealed this was Julie.
The body was naked. She had a ring on one of her ankles. There was a ring going round, a bruising, which could possibly suggest she'd been tied up.
The pathologist said Julie had been killed before the aborted ransom run, but the exact cause of death was still unclear.
The pathologist remarked there were 2 blows to the back of the head with a hammer or something similar to that. But he did say that he wouldn't have expected either of those head wounds to have killed the person. You have to detach yourself from an inquiry in terms of your emotional involvement, because you have a job to do. But I was determined I was going to find the man who killed this poor girl and left a body in a field in Lincolnshire.
In the days that followed Julie's murder, police and leads scanned for clues in the letters from the killer and his victim. And then the kidnapper contacted the police again. And this time, he discussed in detail how Julie Dart had been killed.
Julie was rendered unconscious by 3 or 4 blows to the back of the head, then strangled. He'd mentioned this strangulation. And of course, when the initial post-mortem was conducted on Julie's body, no mention was made of strangulation. The pathologist went back and looked at the body, and what he thought were post-mortem creases in her neck. When he then looked deeper, he saw that the hyoid bone in your neck was fractured, which is a classic sign of strangulation. So if we had any doubts that the guy we're talking to was the killer, I haven't got any now. We're talking to the killer, or he's talking to us.
And intriguingly, this killer was obsessed with his image, claiming his victim's death had been pain-free.
She never felt a thing. He's a psychopath, and he wants to be considered to be a compassionate psychopath. He's no problem with people knowing that he's actually murdered somebody, but wants us to feel that he did it in a very compassionate way. He's a cold, calculated killer. And that's it. Not a cold, calculated, compassionate killer. He's just a killer.
6 months later, police believe the same man had abducted Julie Dart and Stephanie Slater.
We put together a package and we researched the common denominators between the 2 cases, and they were numerous. The man's behaviour, the way he wrote his messages, the way he sent his letters in brown sealed envelopes, the type of pen he used for writing addresses on. There were numerous things that led us to believe that the 2 inquiries were linked.
I always felt that the Julie Dart case, she always was going to die. Now, if he's prepared to kill Julie, then I expected he would kill Stephanie also.
The covert mission to help free kidnapped victim, estate agent Stephanie Slater, is behind schedule. A ransom of £175,000 is being delivered by an untrained civilian, Stephanie's boss, Kevin Watts, putting his life on the line to save his employee. If the kidnapper spots the police, Stephanie Slater will die. Detectives hunting the killer of a Leeds woman were following the operation. The kidnapper of Stephanie Slater was also believed to be the man they were pursuing.
We're eastbound on the A628, Woodhead Pass, towards Yorkshire. Speed decreasing 40 as the fog comes in.
We are in our incident room in Leeds, watching events or waiting for events, and we're being updated on regular bulletins, and then the word got through to us, he's coming across towards Yorkshire.
The detectives are battling the elements in their journey across the Pennines.
Closing in on the courier vehicle. I'm concerned about a loss in these weather conditions.
It's the Woodhead Pass that is notoriously a bad road, and on the night in question, the fog had started to come down and you could barely see a car's length in front of you.
It's a very rural area here. Be aware, team. And it's a stop, stop, stop.
It was directed to a phone box at a place called Oxspring, not too far from Penistone, South Yorkshire. He gets a message under the shelf in the phone box.
This route will show if you are being followed. Back to Crossroads, 50 yards, right up the hill, and then in the middle of the road there's a sign saying Shipways. So it turns left along what is essentially a cart track.
Where we were sat, we were dead opposite the lane that he had been told to go down. From where we were sitting, it just looked like a farm track.
This single-track road will expose the presence of any police surveillance team who follow the novice civilian courier, Kevin Watts.
Team, calling a total loss, total loss.
The thought behind this as a route was first class because nobody could get down that route and keep an eye on Kevin Watts. He was totally and utterly on his own.
Once he'd gone down that lane, he was running totally free and unprotected. He didn't know going down there what he was going to meet, who he was going to meet. He really must have been absolutely frightened to death.
The police believe the kidnapper hiding in the fog was also responsible for a brutal murder. So the letters detectives in Leeds had received from the killer of teenager Julie Dart were valuable pieces of evidence. They gave an insight into the kidnapper's motivation and mindset.
These letters were sent from Nottingham, Huntingdon, Coventry, Leeds, Grantham, York, all over the country. So he's travelling to different places to post these letters. And the sort of text in the letters is telling us things about him. So we're trying to build a profile on him.
One letter ran through the chances of different outcomes that could arise when the killer collected his ransom bounty.
The odds, no matter what the police do, they're going to lose, and he's always going to win. He's building himself up, and he's trying to convince us that he is a master criminal. There is technical statements in his letters. He wants the money wrapped in plastic, 140 or 120 microns thick. Yet, all the letters are absolutely littered with spelling mistakes. But the one thing, why blackmail the police, is particularly taking on the police. And I often wondered at the time whether he was actually testing our system that we operate with the Regional Crime Squad when we do an operation delivering the money through a courier.
The letters were just, frankly, gobsmacking. The thought that this man or men were sitting down, typing these threats, talking about a game, when the game has involved already one girl's death. The older reporters on the patch in that time who'd been working there a lot longer than me, had never experienced anything like it. And frankly, I don't think there's been anything like it since. It was just crazy.
The killer engaged with the police for weeks. His letters included a threat to derail a British rail train, but then suddenly, communication stopped.
For us, in October that year, the trail went cold. But we knew from the profile of the man, all we had to do was wait, because he couldn't resist. He would come back, he would strike again. He was a games player, and he hadn't finished this game.
And now, on a gloomy South Yorkshire evening, the best chance of catching the man responsible for killing Julie and kidnapping Stephanie is reaching its critical stage.
Total loss. Very rural area team. Alpha 3, can you deploy the crop man? Alpha 3, yes. Crops deployed.
The operation had started with around 500 officers on active duty, with hundreds of others on standby to help follow Kevin Watts and hopefully lead directly to the kidnapper. With their vehicles halted, the surveillance team now has to deploy a handful of specialist officers, known as cropsmen, to follow Watts on foot.
They are dumped out in usually the countryside. That's where they're called covert rural operational officers. And they move with Mother Nature. It's a very slow process.
Our job was to safeguard the courier on the route. I don't think I've ever seen fog as bad as that night. It was terrible, and you couldn't see anything in front of you. And it was quite an eerie night, to say the least. I have been involved in other kidnappings, but normally gang-related. This was a different situation. Stephanie was at stake. Somebody's life, which doesn't happen very often.
As Watts drives down the lane, he has to comply with instructions from an earlier message.
150 yards down lane is a small building on the left-hand side. Pick up black bag, transfer all money from your hold-all into this bag.
There's a tracking device sewn into Watts's bag. This is now neutralized, but even worse, his two-way radio microphone malfunctions.
We'd lost contact with the money. We then lost him technically on the tracking devices, and we also lost him on his microphone.
Kevin Watts, a civilian guided only by his sense of duty to his employee, Stephanie, is now alone. He's driving to face a man police believe is a cold-hearted killer. The Crops team are following his route, but progress down the lane is painfully slow.
It wasn't lit at all. There's no lights down there. Very dark and very foggy. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't see the hand in front of your face. It was that bad. We knew this man was a dangerous man, that he could be waiting for us, and he could, at any time, shoot us, and we had to care for our own safety as well as everybody else's.
Looming menacingly somewhere out there in the fog, a callous kidnapper who'd killed before was waiting.
So he goes along the narrow bridleway and eventually stopped with this sign in the road that says stop, has to get out the car, put the money onto the wall, into a tray. The money will not be collected until you have left. So he's got to get in the car, get out the way. And that's it. Must be absolutely terrifying. The money was pulled down over a parapet, down to a valley below.
When officers arrived at the scene sometime later, they discovered the stop sign was actually on a bridge over a disused railway.
One of the officers went down the embankment, found the empty tray, and called it to say that the money was missing. But there was no sign of anybody.
Stand by, team. It's a drop.
Normally waited for a drop, arrest. And it was just an interminable silence.
The
we've lost the money, and to all intents and purposes, we've lost Stephanie Slater.
Police believe that the kidnapper was the same man who had murdered Leeds teenager Julie Dart 6 months earlier. His escape meant Stephanie's life now hung in the balance. West Midlands police were following the operation from the Birmingham headquarters and were desperately waiting for news.
We eventually received the call from the control room to tell me that the operation had been a disaster. I can't remember feeling so low in the whole of my 30-year service. And I couldn't stop thinking about this creature who had us over, and he took 175 grand and was now, in my mind at that time, about to top our only witness. Why should he keep her alive when she was the only person breathing that could help us to track him down and put him away for the rest of his life? We weren't in any mood to be judgmental. I didn't want to know about any inquisition that would follow later. This had been a real good smack in the face for everybody involved.
Then, just before 1 a.m, an extraordinary development.
I was in the commandant's room with a few other officers when the phone rang and they said, Stephanie's returned home.
Oh my God, Stephanie has just stepped through the front door.
Stephanie had been bundled out of a car just a few yards from her parents' home in Birmingham. D.I. Ellie Baker had been embedded with them for the past 8 days.
When I first saw Stephanie, she was very dishevelled. I knew everything about her, but she hadn't got a clue who I was. And Mr. and Mrs. Slater were hugging her, and Stephanie wanted to hug them. But I needed to think, police detective, getting us best forensic, and I didn't want transfer of fibres from the Slaters onto Stephanie's clothing. Her hair was matted, her face was totally drained. She had all makeup going down her face, and her clothes just looked so slept in. She was obviously that traumatised and that petrified.
There's no other way to describe it. We were over the moon. And the incident room at Nechel's Green sort of turned in from a mortuary into a carnival atmosphere kind of place because she was back.
We were all delighted that she'd returned home. It was an elation, because up until that moment, we were convinced we were going to find another body.
But as dawn broke, police faced the realization that the most wanted man in Britain had slipped through their fingers once more.
This is where Stephanie was dropped off. In actual fact, she only lived just down the road here and around to the right, some 100, 150 yards away, that's all. And the person who dropped her off here then escaped. The biggest problem we had that evening was we did not have any surveillance on Stephanie's home. We asked for a surveillance team, a mobile surveillance team, but that application was rejected. We missed him when we should have had him. Fortunately, we had a stroke of luck when there was a witness, a man who used to live at that address behind me, who looked down just here and saw Stephanie get out of the front passenger seat of the car, blindfolded, which obviously looked suspicious. He was actually a paint sprayer by trade, so he knew his colours of vehicles, and he knew it was a vermilion red, a specific vermilion red, which was a great help to us. It was a big bonus. It gave us information that would help us catch the man sooner rather than later.
8 days ago, estate agent Stephanie Slater had been kidnapped by a man police believed was the same person who had murdered Leeds teenager Julie Dart. Now with Stephanie safely home, one of Britain's biggest ever manhunts was underway. But the first attempt by the police to apprehend the kidnapper had failed when he got away with £175,000 in ransom money. And now the press were asking difficult questions.
Are you saying the kidnapper has got away with this?
I'm not saying the kidnapper's got away with it, by no means. Out of this operation, we have learned a great deal. That now will be applied in the investigation to catch him.
We knew about the ransom run after it had all unravelled. 1,000 police officers, the biggest police operation in modern British criminal history, and it's a complete cock-up.
On that night, the kidnapper made his escape seemingly effortlessly from the combined forces of surveillance officers, covert hidden officers, police traffic officers, tracking systems, on and on it went. It's an astonishing story, and it grew and grew because he pulled off the impossible.
In Birmingham, the one person who knew more about the kidnapper than anyone else was about to face the press.
She hadn't been debriefed by the police at this point, but they had made a deal with the press that when she was back, that they would get to interview her immediately.
How have you managed to cope, Stephanie, over the last 7 days?
I don't know, really. You just sort of don't think about it and just go on and do the best you can.
It was far too soon to put her in front of the cameras. But equally, the police were very grateful back then that the embargo had held.
She told me that she thought it'd just be local news. She hadn't got a clue. It was all about her.
Now calm it down. Calm it down. Now be gentle, all of you.
And of course the anticipation was huge. And when she came in, it was like a film star coming in, and was a real sense of relief throughout the room. It was a miracle to see it, to be honest, and it was very humbling and emotional.
She was given a tablet to calm herself down, but she didn't want it to be a big story. She just wanted to get in the shower, wash everything off her, go to bed, in her own bed, with her cat, and she just wanted everybody to leave her alone.
But Stephanie was now the best chance the police had of catching the kidnapper.
We moved her into a private hospital suite in the Birmingham city centre. We were aware that she would have been a fountain of knowledge concerning the man she'd stayed with over the last 7 or 8 days.
We decided to use a new system that hadn't been used in the country before, which was called cognitive interviewing.
Cognitive interviewing would involve the painstaking, minute-by-minute retrieval of Stephanie's memories of her abduction. It brought out the horror of her ordeal.
Stephanie didn't know where she'd been taken and where she was being held. She was blindfolded for the 8 days, so we had to rely on what she could hear, what she could smell, and also what she heard spoken.
It took several days to take Stephanie's statement from her, and the evidence that was coming out from it was quite horrifying. How she'd been treated, the inhumane way. She had to go to the toilet in a bucket. But the most horrifying part was the fact that she was kept on a night in something like this. It was a wheelie bin. So she would go in feet first, her legs would be down at that end. There was a metal bar across the top, which he told her, don't pull down on it, because there's bricks on the top, and the bricks will crush you.
I remember feeling so in pain and so cold, thinking, I'm going to die in here. 25 years old, and this is how I'm going to end up. I was terrified of this person.
He strung her arms up with loops of metal, like a piece of meat, her arms up totally, all night, so that she couldn't actually feel her arms or the rest of her body. He left her and she just lay there with the blood draining from her arms.
He also said there was live electrics in there, so she had to touch anything, otherwise she'd get electrocuted. Absolutely horrifying. And then he would secure the lid closed.
He said no wriggling about or screaming or shouting in there, remember? Or you'll die. But the fear, I mean, I can't reiterate enough how frightened I was.
I think it was so shocking. I'd never, ever heard any victim say anything so horrendous. You can't believe that any human could do that to another human.
And Stephanie's ordeal was even more horrific than police realized. Years later, she revealed that on her first night of captivity, her kidnapper had raped her. But despite her horrific experience, she was able to recall vast amounts of detail about where she'd been held.
Stephanie Slater, I think in my 30 years of policing, was the most reliable, knowledgeable and intelligent witness I ever dealt with. Without a shadow of a doubt. She wasn't a police officer, she wasn't a professional investigator, but she certainly retained information as if she was. For example, there was a telephone being rang and she could hear it ringing out in the distance and the handset being answered. And she mentioned that whenever he left her, he would leave a radio on, and the program was always Radio 2. She was aware that the kidnapper spoke with a northern accent. There was also this as well, which was remarkable. It was a microwave. She could hear it ringing out, and with the door opening and closing again in the distance. And then one other thing she noticed from above the blindfold was that the roof of the room she was in was actually made up of wooden rafters and beams, so we could aid the building a little bit. Now, each one of these on their own would be less significant, but together they were forming the picture we needed of the location where she was kept in captivity. Every minute of every day and night, she must have feared for her life. And in response, her only way was to keep appeasing the man that was the major threat to her.
She did as she was told, and that she didn't try and fight and she didn't try and argue with him. I actually think that's what saved Stephanie's life, that she was actually compliant.
I was chatting with him and making him see me as another human being rather than someone he could just lock up or kill or whatever. We'd say something and he would laugh or, you know, make a joke of something, and I think, yes, I'm getting on with him, yeah, and he's not going to kill me.
She was a remarkable girl. She really was. She got into him under his skin.
I mean, Julie Dart was totally different, I should imagine. She would have argued, and that was probably the difference between the two girls that resulted in Julie's death and Stephanie's survival.
Stephanie told the police that the kidnapper had returned with his £175,000 ransom after 10 p.m. He told her she was going home. Despite being blindfolded, the journey enabled Stephanie to provide more vital information.
Throughout the whole of that journey, there were various features that she recalled, such as he made mention of motorway signs. From what Stephanie had told us, we were able to work out the motorway she was brought down on by the kidnapper. We identified the distance between Stephanie's house and the very furthest point she could have travelled along that motorway, which actually came just north of Newark. Now, she'd already told us that where she was being captive, there was actually a railway line running close by because she could hear trains in the far distance.
The information Stephanie provided about her journey home and the frequency of trains passing by where she was held captive enabled the police to map an area in which they were sure she was being held, the so-called Golden Triangle.
The result of that exercise, which created that triangle, was absolutely essential to us because we had now reduced the size of the area where we knew she had been confined. And we knew, obviously, if we could find that, that would lead us to the kidnapper.
With police now convinced that the same man that kidnapped Stephanie had also killed Julie Dart, a joint task force was set up to investigate both cases. It was headed by Assistant Chief Constable Tom Cook from West Yorkshire. That prompted another extraordinary letter from the kidnapper.
So during the investigation of Julie Dart, there were a number of letters, but they all stopped, and we weren't expecting to receive any more letters. But once the two inquiries had been linked, we then astonishingly received a letter from the kidnapper of Stephanie Slater, which we knew was also the murderer of Julie Dart. So the letter begins, the facts: I, being the kidnapper of Stephanie Slater, am not the killer of Julie Dart. It is impossible that there can be any positive connection between the two cases.
He's still trying to play games, and he's now fearing that he might get arrested, starting to think about, right, I've got to distance myself from the murder. So he started to lay the ground for another person being involved.
Even now, my eyes are filled with tears. I wake up during the night, actually crying, with a little look, Stephanie, we'll get over it shortly. Myself, I do not think I ever will. Sorry, Stephanie. Sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Slater. Well, anybody will be able to see the crocodile tears. This is a man who's killed. This letter is saying, I've never killed before. Stephanie knew at the time when she was released that this man had killed before, and she was very lucky to escape his evil clutches. The letter was sanctimonious claptrap from my point of view. It was apologising to the family, but there was something in him that wanted to show that everyone needed to see just how good he was.
But was the kidnapper's letter-writing habit about to be his undoing?
We weren't annoyed or upset by it at all. The more letters he sent to us, the better for us, because we got more information on him. He was giving us, every time he communicated, another piece of the jigsaw to fit in.
January 1992. A huge investigation was underway to catch a kidnapper. The man was suspected of abducting Stephanie Slater and earlier killing another woman, Julie Dart. Against all the odds, he had evaded a huge police operation to collect £175,000. Now he'd become Britain's most wanted man.
Some people, even on my team, thought it was, an ex-SAS, survival expert. And of course, this was speculated in the press. How could this one man evade 1,000 police officers?
But by now, the police knew a great deal about Britain's most wanted man and believed the media held the key.
Tom Cook decided that he didn't want to swamp the press, so he decided to focus on 4 aspects of it. The photo fit that had been taken from a witness at Turnberry Road where Stephanie had been kidnapped. The fact that the person had been seen wearing railway memorabilia.
And we added the details of the car, the million red Metro, Austin Metro, and we had a recording of his voice.
So, what is the best way to get that to the public in a controlled way? Crime Watch.
The police plan was to get everything they had and put it on the BBC Crime Watch programme, which was a huge show back in the early 90s, a regular 12 million viewers. They would recreate, with police assistance, that month's most serious crimes and talk the viewers through any bits of evidence they felt they could make public and appeal for witnesses.
We just wanted to put enough out for the public to easily digest the information we were after. And then we played the recording of his voice.
Hello, Kevin Watt.
Speaking.
Have you got the money?
Hello?
Have you got the money?
Who's this, please?
Never mind. Have you got the money? For tomorrow?
For tomorrow.
Yeah. Have you got it?
I'm getting it, yeah.
By the time Crime Watch had ended that night, over 13,000 calls had been received, and West Midlands Police began working through the enormous volume. Far fewer calls came in to the Julie Dart incident room in Leeds, but one stood out.
So we're in the bar, and then one of the officers came in and said, Bob, we've had a call from a woman who says she believes it's her ex-husband.
She'd seen him at a funeral the week before. He had the red vermilion Metro. It looked like the artist's impression. He was an absolute railway nut. And the voice. He said, that's his voice.
Have you got the money? For tomorrow?
For tomorrow?
Yeah. Have you got it?
The only significant thing about him, which was a bit of a negative factor, was he only had one leg.
I said, right, OK. Has he got a form? He said, yeah, I think he has. I said, well, let's have a look at the photograph. So I went and looked at this photofax as it appeared coming through. And as it emerged from the machine, I could see, in particular, the heavy brows that cast a shadow of thick black hair over dark, cold eyes. And it was exactly how Stephanie Slater described him. And that's when I said, right, we'll go down. Where does he live? Sutton-on-Trent.
Sutton-on-Trent was technically within John Plimmer's Golden Triangle and in West Midlands Police area of operation. But the West Yorkshire officers had a murderer in their sights, and within an hour, Tim Grogan and 3 other officers were knocking on the door of a man called Michael Sams.
We were greeted by Tina Sams, and we said, we're after Michael. He's at work. He's gave us the address of the work he was at, T&M Tools. Agreed he got a Vermilion Red Metro. So we said, right, we've got a lot of inquiries to do in the area. We'll come back later and see him at home. The route from Sutton to Newark is 18 minutes. Well, let me tell you that on that day, we did it in 8 minutes. An archway appears on our right. Stephanie described a right turn. The Swan and Salmon Yard. As we turned right in the Swan and Salmon Yard and descended the slope, I turned to say, this is like going down Wembley Way. That's how confident I was we were on the right track. As we got to the bottom of the slope, sure enough, parked there was the Vermilion Red Metro. So I shouted, anybody here? And then into my view came this shambling, limping individual, really accentuating the limp, and said, "Can I help you?" Said from the police, "Yes, I've been expecting you." Sams was calm, cool, calculated. Didn't have anything to say at all. Just watching, his rat-like eyes, looking at around. Looked at the beam above his head that Stephanie had described. The old phone, the microwave, the radio, tuned into Radio 2. Absolutely bang on. Her recall was astonishing.
At 11:25 a.m. today, a 50-years-old local man was arrested in Newark, Nottingham, and is being held in connection with the kidnapping of Stephanie Slater.
It was only when we got him to Newark police station that the blood drained from his face. He was grey, slumped, and said, "I kidnapped Stephanie Slater, but I didn't murder Julie Dart." When you arrest him, you kick into professional mode. But I will say that a couple of days later, I was hit with a charge of emotion. When you're thinking back to what happened, that this was the guy that had been heard on the radio, on the television, most wanted man in Great Britain, and you locked him up.
Journalists began digging for background on the so-called Phantom of the Fog.
The first person I talked to said, "It's the tool fitter, it's Michael Sams, but it's ridiculous." And I said, "Well, why would it be ridiculous?" And they said, "He's only got one leg."
Nobody knew that he had only got one leg, which was sort of a bit like, you know, pulling the curtain back on The Wizard of Oz.
From this gang of military experts, the SAS-trained criminal superbrain, we have a one-legged tool fitter. The emphasis for journalists is to find out everything you possibly can about the life and times of this character. And it very quickly emerged that he was a failure in life.
Sam's hatred of the police went back years, to a conviction for motoring insurance fraud in 1978.
He didn't think that he should have gone to prison, so he had a deep resentment for the police as a result of that.
And his attitude towards the authorities worsened after he complained about a pain in his knee.
And they just thought he wanted an easy time in the hospital wing. And it wasn't until his knee was really bad that they started to look at it and realised he'd got cancer. So they operated, but it was so bad they had to remove his lower limb. So, you know, he's got a lot of reasons to think that it's the police have done him wrong.
And from then on, he had got in his mind he wanted to commit this crime of kidnapping somebody and holding them to ransom.
Sams admitted abducting Stephanie, but denied knowing anything about Julie Dart's death. West Yorkshire needed evidence to convict him of her murder.
He's admitting Stephanie Slater. We're convinced it's the same man. We've got our killer. I needed time for the forensic teams to find the evidence that I knew must be there. There was a curtain hanging down, and it looked like on the bottom there was watery blood. It had seeped up off the floor into the bottom of the curtain, so, you know, that went for testing. It came back as quite a rare blood group, 6.4% of the population, but it wasn't Michael Sams nor his wife's. But it was the same blood group as Julie Dart. So that's the first positive we've got. That is still not enough. I needed more.
West Midlands police were the first to interview Sams. He claimed that he'd never meant Stephanie any harm.
The day that my photo fit was released, I was on the train that day, and two railway blokes were discussing it, and they said that the only mistake he ever did, he didn't kill her. And it... I just couldn't...
Put it down, Michael, please. In case I didn't come out, you said I couldn't have hurt her.
No.
Sams was charged with Stephanie's abduction. He was then transferred to Leeds to be interviewed about Julie Dart.
I sat in the back of the van purposely, with Sams, because I knew he couldn't keep quiet. And of course, when we're driving back, he said, "Are we going to Millgate?" And of course, throughout the letters that Sams had written to us, he referred to Millgate Police Station, which was a mistake because it was Millgarth Police Station. And this is once again one of the mistakes that our killer had made.
West Yorkshire Police were given 3 days to put together a case against Sams.
We were dealing with a cold, cruel murderer, and he was interviewed on that basis.
The mistake that Julie Dart made when you had her confined was that she had tried to escape or remove that blindfold. And that is why she saw where she was, she saw you, and she had to die. Is that the truth?
No, it isn't the truth. There's no truth in that whatsoever.
The detectives confronted him with the letters they were convinced he had written.
This doesn't bring back any memories.
No.
Words will never be able to express my regret that Julie Dart had to be killed.
No.
But I did warn what would happen if anything went wrong.
No.
Doesn't at all.
Not one little bit.
We started looking at the handwritten letter, which said had been written left-handed. So he writes this piece that we'd asked him to write with his left hand. We fax it off to the handwriting expert.
And of course, one thing he did respect was experts. Right, it is your handwriting. The forensic scientist says it's your handwriting. Yes, it is my handwriting. I'll accept that now because you've proved it.
But there was one line of questioning the police wanted to pursue more than any other.
The kidnapper referred to another man that was helping him, but he explained to Stephanie that he was the nasty man, and if anything happened, if she tried to escape, that he would get her.
Well, he said, "Oh, I'm holding you with my mate, who is a nasty piece of work, my mate." He wouldn't like him. He kind of built up this mate to be some really bad ogre, so I became more frightened of the mate than I did of him.
The other man was now the main focus of the questioning.
Where did you meet this associate?
Refused to answer that.
How old is he?
Refused to answer that.
And you,
I'm refusing,
I am
refusing to name him, irrespective of what you think of me and what you do to me.
We were of the opinion that he was planning to divert any blame for the Julie Dart murder onto this unknown third party.
The one thing he didn't do was accept responsibility for the murder. It was the other man. It was always the other man.
To put Sams behind bars for murder, police needed to find out the truth about the other man. Only £20,000 of the ransom money had been recovered, but could finding the rest of it provide the final piece of the puzzle?
We needed to find the money to destroy the existence of the other man. Because if the other man existed, surely he would have found the money and he would have been spending it.
The hunt for the missing cash was on. Britain's most wanted man, Michael Sams, had been arrested. He'd admitted kidnapping Stephanie Slater, but denied that he'd also murdered teenager Julie Dart. Detectives now intended to find the ransom money and prove his guilt.
When Sams was arrested, his house was searched, and he said that the other man had taken that money and disappeared with it.
He denied ever being near the place where Julie Dart's body had been abandoned, but he did confess to train spotting at nearby Stoke Summit.
Now, this is the Mecca for railway enthusiasts and train spotters, because historically the Mallard broke the steam record on this stretch of line. But why would Sams be here, train spotting, when 98% of all the trains that go through here go past the railway line at the end of his garden? So there had to be another reason. And was that reason the fact that the money was buried here? So when we looked at all the different possibilities of where he could have buried the money, this came out on top.
But finding it was a different proposition. D.S. Grogan contacted a former SAS colonel who specialised in finding arms caches in Northern Ireland. He helped map a potential search area, and there was room for one more innovative piece of thinking.
Somebody came to me and said, why don't you use ground probing radar? Now, that meant as much to me as the theory of relativity.
Peter Simpkins normally used his radar to locate underwater pipes.
OK, and we've got a good target just below the surface there. Go back.
But on the 1st of December, he and 30 members of the West Yorkshire Task Force attempted to find Sam's hidden cache.
So we went down with the ground probing radar and we set the coordinates for something the size of a big car battery. And he went up and down the field, and that's how we proceeded. For the first day, found nothing. And the second day, it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Peter set off doing runs across on this property here. Just after dinner, a shout goes up, he'd found something. And what did they find? A seed tray full of money, just 4 inches under the surface. The chances of us finding that were remote.
But the team's elation was short-lived as the phone rang in the police incident room.
It was the governor of Winson Green saying, I had Michael Sams in my office this morning saying, if you found one package, you've not found all the money, there's another one.
I still don't understand the reasoning for him ringing us, but of course, significantly, if we'd only found half of it, possibly the other man's got the other half and he's spending it. We actually hadn't moved forward.
Sam's insistence that another man was involved remained an unlikely but still possible scenario, so the DART team returned to Stoke Summit.
Our man with the ground probing radar is now heading back to Aberdeen. So we cobbled together a small team to come back the following day. We concentrated in the same area, and I'd just got a metal prodder, just prodding the earth. And I said to one of the officers, just dig there. Oh, no, not there, give us it here, in here. And then I shoved it in to the soil. I felt it go through something, pulled it out, and there's a 1 gallon ice cream container on the end of the fork, full of notes. That was an absolutely fantastic moment. I knew then we had sealed the case against Michael Sams. So I just raised it up and went, Sams, you bastard, I've got you now. Great moment.
On June the 9th, 1993, Michael Sams went on trial at Nottingham Crown Court, charged with the kidnapping and imprisonment of Stephanie Slater and the murder of Julie Dart. On the 8th of July, the jury returned a guilty verdict.
He was totally unmoved. I just recall seeing those cold, dark eyes that no one will ever penetrate because he was a very evil and cruel man.
Sams was given 4 life sentences.
I think that if Sams had not been arrested, he would have come back again. Once he'd had a taste of outwitting the police, he wouldn't have resisted having another crack. And he was quite happy to kill.
It was just a disgusting human being with no moral fibre whatsoever. He murdered Julie Dart. He kept Stephanie Slater in a box for over a week. The man is inhuman.
At the end of the trial, Stephanie was free, but ultimately she was never free of what happened to her. She would tell me that she couldn't sleep. She would have horrific nightmares. She was just this damaged, broken girl.
It was the worst ordeal that I've ever witnessed, ever had to take a statement from. It still upsets me when I think about all that happened to her.
What she went through, that girl, was purgatory. And how she responded was amazing. Absolutely courageous and amazing. And she got him caught and captured because of the information she gave us.
And delving into more true crime, detectives and forensics reveal how they caught a killer at the crime scene. Available to watch now on My5. Next tonight on Channel 5, Traffic Cops.